deny that proposing Christianity in this day and age can be challenging. However, our next speaker finds his strength not only in the cage, but in his Catholic faith. In a world where belief is often tested, he proves that faith and resilience go hand in hand. So he's here to share his journey, challenges he's faced, and how he lives that faith with courage and conviction. So please welcome pro MMA fighter, Ciarán Clarke.
Thanks very much, Fiona. It's great fun to put up there. Second guess and taking another slice of that pizza. I don't want to look at that. So for people that don't know, my name is Ciarán Clarke. I'm actually brought a man, so travel a bit down there to come down. I'm actually delighted to look at all the fans of benscallan. I'm a big fan, and of course Centre and Clodagh as well. So thanks very much for having me down. I suppose I'll start with really how I suppose having faith for me. I think maybe, I done one or two of these talks before and was like, how did you find your faith? But I actually always had my faith because I was reared Catholic. I was reared with two single women, my mum and my nanny, and I was the eldest of four in the council house. And to be honest, I would be a little bit reluctant to mention that because in the past, because it's I suppose not the nuclear family, but as we know, as we read the Bible, and it's a lot of brokenness, and that's how God walked through us, through the brokenness of us, and that's our humanity, of course. But anyway, like I said, my grandmother had great faith, and we were reared in that. And it just started from smaller things, like I'd say small things now, but like going to bed, saying our prayers, or going to mass every Sunday. It created a good relationship for me, my family at the time, and we grew all together. And we didn't have, not that we were poor by any stretch of imagination, but like we didn't have, there wasn't much of a wantonness for material things. We weren't very worldly or anything like that, and that's again down to our faith, And I suppose then I have to mention, I suppose, because it might be just a question that might be thrown up at me, why mixed martial arts? Why cage fighting? Well, I'm going to fight my corner a little bit because the sports corner, because the sport's under a bit of scrutiny in the last couple of years. Of course, that's down to the individuals, not the sport. But why? Well, like I said, reared by my single mother and my grandmother as well. I kind of had this growing up, and I was the eldest. I had this kind of, conviction or feeling I had to be the man of the house. And I associate that with like masculinity and being the protector, and as a young boy, like I know that sounds strange, but that was kind of my way of anything happening. Like I mentioned, growing up in Drogheda, it's well documented the feud that happened a couple of years ago. So obviously Drogheda, what was a hard place to grow up in those times. But so I kind of had this feeling of that. Strange enough, now as I get older now, I'm 29, I know I don't look it, but I realise now being the man of the house is actually, doing your chores or cleaning up after yourself. It's not been like, the protector of what I had in my mind. So, and as well, like I was always very articulate when I was young and stuff. So when I took up mixed martial arts, I did sports and stuff growing up. That kind of went hand in hand. I was articulate. I could do it in my own way, especially martial arts. You can do it any type of body. I could take anyone up here now that could do it. To be a basketball player, you have to be 6 foot, or to be a rugby player, you have to be, obviously all of these attributes that didn't fit. So, and again, to go back to my artistic side, I loved art and I could express myself through that. I never was a team player, or I was always afraid or shy to get the ball or things like that. But so that's why I kind of gravitated towards that, and I absolutely loved it. I couldn't focus in school. I was always one of the youngest in my class, and teachers constantly asked me to stay back, so this gave me a focus, and, gave me confidence. And actually now that I realise it was actually Jesus' way of walking through me. He was actually, this sport was to keep me in the straight and narrow. I wasn't tempted by certain things, and like I said, I was born for it. I was born to do that, and that was God's way of walking through me to keep me right. And what I wanted to mention as well, again, back to mixed martial arts, why that? Well, people say, cage fighting, but just to mention, the reason why there's a cage involved is because actually it's another art involved there. It's actually for the safety to keep you inside, and It's, again, people look at the violence of it, and of course, I'm not doing it to be hurting people, or I just appreciate the art of it. But actually, funny enough, martial arts, especially while I'm a professional, so it's thank God I'm 10-0 and undefeated at the minute, and please God may I keep going. But with that comes a lot of sacrifices. And think about it, you all know yourselves, being a Catholic, what is it, or what is love? It's the sacrifice. It's to make the choice to say no to other things. And that actually, it's kind of like if you think of two trains running alongside each other, that is actually the sport. Now, a lot, of course, sport in general, but mixed martial arts, you have to make your weight, so you're fasting a lot. And what Jesus asks us to fast. So a lot of these things is taken, away from you by your own choice. So a lot of these things kind of run together, and it's suffering, it's physical and mental suffering. But it's a choice. I'm doing it because I want it. And then again, of course, then, I'm going to mention them a lot here, is, we could talk with technology as well, especially now. I came across Fulton Sheen, I'm too young to even, of course, I'm sure there's probably many people there that know that Fulton Sheen is probably maybe 50s and 60s on the television in the States. He was a big, evangelist at that time, but he said there's two philosophies in life, and it's the feast and then the hangover, or it's the fast and then the feast. And that's being a Catholic, and that was being in the sport. That was it for me. It still is. It's saying no now for the greater good, and that's like as well as that, it's carrying your cross now, and what Jesus asks us to carry the cross now. And that for me was my way to find out about that in my own kind of way. I kind of was like, that correlates with that. As I got a bit older, then I started to realise then, learn about the sacraments, and actually learning about, confession, and like growing up and stuff, even like, again, I was going to Mass, but I always thought like even the Eucharist was a symbol. Actually, you realise it's actually the actual blood of Jesus, the actual body and blood of Jesus is up on that altar. When you go, why do we bow? That's actually him up there. That's what I came to realise when I got older, and these things he left for us to use that, and that's what I encourage young people. And people might say, why go to confession? Why would I tell someone else? Well, first of all, Jesus said it to do it. But second of all, they say, if God's everywhere, well, why do I have to go to a church? Well, there's water in the atmosphere, but if you want to take a drink, you have to go to the well. So, and another thing as well, if someone doesn't darken your door, I'm sure you wouldn't be too reluctant, you'd be a bit reluctant to help them. So all of these things is left here by Jesus for us to use, and it's only in the last recent years, and of course, going back even, they left the Ten Commandments, and some people have a bad relationship with the Ten Commandments. It's like, God's telling you not to do that, because he's telling you not to. But he's telling you not to do it because if you don't follow these commandments, you will be unhappy. It'll be hell on earth for you. And if you want to choose that, like I say, going back to the choice, and, we're all longing for something in life that, that's why people do drugs, and there's this internal longing for us all inherently, that we're all born that way. That's why the animals don't have this, because we have this longing for God. That's our purpose. Go back to Fulton Sheen, he said, a pencil, if it could speak, well, I suppose when it's doing its purpose of writing, it would be in its full contentment. That's Christ on the cross as well. When he's up there, Shia LaBeouf actually said it, Christ in that moment is probably in his greatest happiness, even though in his height of suffering, that was his faith, that was his destiny, and he's probably in that moment in his greatest glory for us, taking on the sins of the world. And again, going back to like Fulton Sheen, I'm sorry I keep mentioning him, it's been a big influence on me in my life. We've three inherent things as humans, what we want, and it's life, truth, and love. And what did Jesus say? He said, I am the way, the life, and the truth. And that's the only three things. What do we want? Life. We want eternal life. We want truth, which is Jesus. He told us who he is. And as well, love, constant. If we're looking around us for everything else, and we're longing for this and that, like I said, that's why people take drugs, or look for elsewhere. They have this longing, but they don't know what it is. And the reason why they don't, and we all, speaking for myself, it doesn't fit our needs, our wants, our desires here. But like I said, it's saying no now for the greater good. And it just, it was great questions there with Paul, like how can we, the young people like yourself, or maybe younger, or the generation, but and I love, Father Mark, of course, like at the end of the Mass, what did he say? He said, go out and do it by your life. Not what we say with words, or it's how you live your life. So I hope to be, and everybody else, we can go out here then, or after Mass, when we give them the final lesson, we can go out and be the actual example, not by our words. And maybe another thing as well, advice for young people, there's two things that I learned recently, and it was always pretend someone, the person next to your neighbour, is Jesus in disguise. And I'm sure you would definitely think about giving the beggar or the homeless person money, or you think about doing that for the person more if you knew it was for Jesus. And another thing that helped me recently as well, and this was actually my own inspiration to myself, that was given to me by God, of course, and anything I have in life is from God, of course. Come back to my career and stuff, and I was in tough fights, and not to boys, but I was getting beaten, bodies, broken noses and concussions, and who did I turn to? And it wasn't God to ask me to win. It was actually God, Jesus, please give me the strength to get through this, whether it be win or loss, and hopefully we can be in line with His will, and that was it for me. And come back to what we're saying, and for me it was an inspiration I got for the young people, is like just saying no 3 times a day, denying yourself, just maybe once, 2, 3 times, no, okay, no, I won't do that, or I won't eat the whole packet, I might have to, right, things like that, so just little things, small little things, and actually, as we're told, that actually alleviates, we can use that to alleviate the hurt that Jesus has done under the cross. Use that. You don't just suffer on your own. Like, use that actual suffering. Say, I'm doing this for Jesus. And it's funny enough, because when you actually start doing things, personally, I start realising the reward I'm getting back, and how better you feel. And again, ultimately, like I said, going back to the 3 things we're always looking in life inherently. We're made for God. That's who we are, and we're not doing anything other than that. And again, I'm not the perfect saint, and I feel a bit of imposter syndrome up here, but of course we're all called to be saints. But that is it. If we can all go out here now and do that, and not just because I said it, of course. And go back to the masculinity thing. I used to think it's been tough for. And again, like I said, I'm probably an unassuming character. I've been a professional fighter, but for me it was you go into the monasteries. And that's the most masculine thing you could do, is that these men are being a father and giving up giving their life to God. The oath of celibacy, and that to me is like, it's not physical, it's the spiritual. That's what it is to me, and I suppose that I hope the young people can take that away from here today. And again, like that, there is hope in the world. And like Paul asked, how can we do that? And come back to even the question that man there had about the political, why is there no political parties? But actually, these political parties forget the independence of our country. These men, excuse me, ignorance, but these men were going to Mass to be receiving the Eucharist before they were dead to die. That's what a lot of people forget. This great faith Ireland had in this country. The massive faith that we had. These men were dying for the country, and again, of course, they were doing godly things as well, but they had great faith, and that's what I would say. These people are forgetting that, and let's hope that we can be that as well here today, and as we go out there. And I'll just leave it on this. I don't want to bore you anymore. I did one of these talks before, and Dana was actually one of the guests, and my nanny said, don't bore me anymore, I want to hear Dana sing. So unfortunately Dana's not here with me, but I'll leave it with this. But Pope John Paul said, and I'm sure there's plenty of people here that might have even seen him all them years ago, but he said, never give up in hope, and pray, and never give up, never. And I suppose to leave it at that is, there is hope out there, and please God, we can all do that by living our lives. So thanks very much.
So for our next guest speaker, so often when we hear the word social media, we have immediate negative connotations. But there are some flowers amongst the thorns, and our next guest speaker is certainly one of them. So the way that she promotes faith is gentle, sincere and eloquent, and she seems to weave it seamlessly into her personal life, her work for Aid to the Church in Need, and her travels. So next up is Clodagh Gallagher.
Thank you, Emer. I'm honoured to be here. When I saw the lineup, I thought, do they really want me to talk about social media and my job? Like, that's not very interesting. But I suppose to go back to what Senator Mullen had said earlier, we all have our spheres of influence, and I think we'd all kind of agree that my generation have kind of lost the faith. And so I guess that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit. But just to kind of weave in how I even came to faith. So I'm Clodagh, I'm 31, I'm from County Waterford, which is such an underrated part of the country. I could talk the 15 minutes about County Waterford. It's so beautiful. We've got like the mountains, the forest, the beach. It's unbelievable, and that's the backdrop against which I grew up. And I suppose that was really my first encounter with God. I was a bit feral as a child, so I used to go off for hours and hours, and man would be like out looking for me in the fields. Where is she gone? And I'd be up trees and in rivers, but I really found great peace in nature, and I still do. And that was really my first encounter with God, supplemented with, I guess, the fact that my grandparents had really great faith. They were my favourite people to hang out with. I used to ask my parents, can I please sleep over at Granny Grandad's this weekend? And they had my own bedroom down there, but I used to prefer to be tucked in between the two of them with like the million rosary beads on the bed. And so I think they were really foundational for my faith. They made the church for me a place of comfort, and I've never really related to people who've had criticism for the church, or people who've gone up and I suppose only experienced the negative things to do with the church. For me, the church was always a place of comfort and a place of warmth. And so because I think of that upbringing, I had a real kind of inner conscience as a child. I would talk to God. I didn't tell my friends that I talked to God, but I would talk to God in my head, and I would be like, what do you think about this? And like, da-di-da, as you do as a child, very innocent. But then when I was 11, going on into 12, I was bullied quite badly. I was in 6th class, to the point where like I didn't talk for months on end. Like, it was really bad, and I'm fine, but we're all good friends again since. But it marked me so much as to really transform like my personality, my temperament. I was very happy-go-lucky, as I've described, like prancing around the fields, la la la. And then after that I became very melancholic. Going into secondary school then kept that kind of very melancholic, very depressed kind of temperament. And then you're a teenager and hormones kick in, and like your parents don't know if you're moody because you're a moody teenager or if you're moody because like something else is wrong. So would have been a very moody kind of door slamming kind of teenager, very unhappy. I don't know if anyone else here can relate to that. I don't know if you have any teenagers, but that's the way I was. And very sharp contrast to my siblings, who were just like very happy children. So went through secondary school like that, very insecure, would have read a lot, like not very happy with myself, but I wasn't acting out, so I don't think my parents thought that anything was wrong. I think they just thought that, that's who she is. And then I went to college, I went to UCD, and I didn't really have any kind of sense of like hope for my life, or any sense of like, what would you say, any real motivation or drive or interest in like, living really. I was just existing, and looking back I feel sorry for myself, but at the time I didn't think really anything of it, because actually a lot of my friends who didn't have faith, I would have thought that I had faith at the time, little did I know, but a lot of my friends, were living pretty much an identical life to me. We were drinking like way too much and going out all of the time, and it was a really depressing, meaningless life. And not that you can't go out and enjoy yourself, I still go out and enjoy myself, I love a glass of red wine, but it was really empty. And there was nothing really different about my life to my friends' lives. Like my friends would never have gone to Mass on Sundays, whereas I was going home to my parents at the weekends and still going to Mass on Sundays, living kind of like a double life. So I'm 19, I'm actually depressed. I don't realise that I am, but I am actually depressed, and I'm drinking way too much and spending time with people who really aren't my friends and don't care about me. And then it was around the time of the recession, so maybe this is relatable to some of you here, but like things would have been quite hard for a lot of people economically, and then you're in college and you're not earning enough money, and so you feel like you're kind of a burden on your family, and that kind of added to it. I didn't really want to share any of that with my family, and so my conscience began to grow really heavy, and I just felt like I was a burden, and I was like too much, and the idea of God became something very distant. It was like kind of not someone omnipresent, but someone who kind of check in now and again, someone very far away, someone who isn't really paying attention to you. And by the grace of God, when I was 19, my granddad, God rest his soul, he was a very holy man, he was obviously praying a lot for me because he could see like I wasn't really right, and he gave my mother to give to me. This might sound really funny, and I don't really recommend that you repeat this, but it worked for me. He gave my mum a book on purgatory, which maybe you would think that's not the right thing to give someone who's very depressed, like another very depressing book. And it's quite a scary book actually. It's about it's got the imprimatur and the nihil obstat, so it's solid, like you can believe what you read in it, but it's basically a collection of accounts of people who've been visited by souls from purgatory. And my mother gave me this because my granddad had said, "You're to give this to her now, this is going to really help her," and Mum was like, "It's not going to help her, like this is going to make her worse." But she gave me the book, and I couldn't put it down. I read it 3 times over and over and over, because for me the holy souls in purgatory and their suffering made so much sense. I was suffering, but I didn't feel like I had enough to be suffering for, if that makes sense. Like I felt very privileged and very like there was no real reason for my suffering, so could I just like snap out of it and get over myself? But it was encountering what purgatory is and the mercy of what purgatory is that really helped me. And so I started praying the rosary every day, and I think that was like the beginning of my path to actual conversion. I'd been raised Catholic, praying the rosary, going to Mass, but I didn't really know what any of it meant, and I definitely didn't believe that God loved me individually, personally, or was paying attention to me at all, or that I mattered, which I do. And so that was definitely the start. I started praying the rosary every day, and it was definitely like a slow slog. I was still kind of, there'd be days where I couldn't be bothered going to college, or there'd be nights where instead of staying and studying, my friends would be like, "Would we go out?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." And I'd be gone again. So it was a slow conversion, but it was the fact that I had my mother and my father and my grandparents, and they were just really good people and very gentle with me. And going back to what Senator Ronan said earlier, just to be gentle with people, because you never really know what's going on in their head and in their heart. And I know that if they had been militant with me, or if they had been harsh with me, like I wouldn't have kept going along this path of praying the rosary and doing my best. But it wasn't great. Like I was 19, then going on 20, and I was still kind of like didn't really have a sense of value for myself or my life. And it was I was 20, and it was that summer, and I'm working my part-time summer job, like my 40 hours, and I'm loving life because I have that bit of money for the weekend and all of that and everything that goes with that. And then my mom said to me, "Clodagh, would you give up your job just for 1 week and volunteer at this faith camp and look after all of these children?" I don't know if any of you are from Munster, but in Munster we have faith camps all along the south coast. You might be similar to Camp Veritas in the Midlands if you know of them, but it's beautiful. And I was like, absolutely not. I'm not missing a week of work, a week of paid work. Like, are they going to pay me? And she was like, no, they're not going to pay you. And so we had a big hoo-ha about it, and eventually I agreed to go, because she just said, look, I can see that you're not happy, and you were always such a happy child, and will you please just do this for me? So I went, and I've never looked back. I had the best week of my life. I met other Catholics, people same age as me, and we became best friends. One of them, she's married now in the US, and she's got 2 babies, and she's very devout. And the other is a Dominican, and the other guy, he just qualified as an accountant, but very, very holy, like very good people. And it was incredible to finally, for the first time in my life, have community and to feel loved. And we had all these priests, and actually this year, for whatever reason, they had brought a ton of seminarians from this seminary somewhere in Italy or something, I don't know, to help out. And I remember, because I'd been reading this book about purgatory all year, but I had no one really to talk to about it, I remember just hammering them with questions, because I had all these thoughts built up about purgatory and these deep theological questions, and I had no one to ask them to, because I was not asking my parish priest at home, because I would have been mortified to ask him, but I was asking all these seminarians, and maybe I'm the reason they never came back, I don't know, but I was asking them like every evening. So for that week, like after the faith camp, we would all convene at this lady, Margaret Me, and absolute saint, we'd all go to her house, and there'd be like a feast, and we'd just be eating and playing, I don't know, dodgeball or whatever, and we could be going down to the beach and just chatting about faith and life. And it was as good crack as all my nights out, but it was so real. It was so much more real than any of those nights out. And we weren't afraid to talk about things like purgatory or life and death, or the meaning of life, and it was so beautiful. And that one week just changed my life forever. Like I've never looked back. And the week after that, Youth 2000 was on. I'd never heard of Youth 2000, but I went, and it was there that I encountered the Eucharist for the first time. And I remember just breaking down, like in a good way. When you have a good cry, like it's a good cathartic cry. So that was in this little hall in Tipperary. It was in Rosscray at the time of the summer festival. So that's like 11 years ago now. And there's been ups and downs, and growth isn't completely linear, but I'm not depressed. Very, very happy. I wake up every morning excited for my day, and I go to sleep every night very grateful for my life, and I'm never really sad, except if I have a real reason to be sad. But it's night and day, and I feel like I really am who God created me to be now, in a way that I really wasn't during my teenage years, and I really wouldn't have been if I hadn't encountered Jesus in the Eucharist, and if I hadn't encountered, importantly, Catholic community, people my own age, who had the courage to ask these questions about life, and the courage then to live it out. And so eventually that led me to working for Aid to the Church in Need. And I better be careful what I say here, because my colleague David is here, and he could speak about ACN much better than I could, so I might call him up in a minute. But so in 2020 I started working then for Aid to the Church in Need. And if you don't know ACN, you might know our publication, The Mirror. It's something that we send out every month, and it's got a lot of our projects. What we do is we are a pontifical Catholic charity, and we help Christians who are persecuted for their faith around the world. So we have at any one time about 5,500 projects active in 147 countries around the world, and the office in Ireland is just one of 22 offices. And so what we do is anything from rebuilding churches or seminaries that have been bombed because of terrorism, or we are funding catechists to go through catechism training school. There's just a variety. If you go onto our website, acnireland.org, there's so many projects. Some of you maybe support us, but so that's who I work for. But I don't think I was invited here really to speak about ACN. Emer mentioned social media, and initially when she messaged me, I was kind of reluctant to talk about social media, because I just thought, social media, people will just think I'm very vapid and like vain, but that in itself was pride. So I post a lot about my faith on social media, just on Instagram really, and I suppose it's been a very transforming thing to do. I don't see it as a huge big deal, just because all I am really doing is being myself, and my faith is such a huge part of my life. So I post about it, and through that I've had a lot of conversations with those friends that I mentioned earlier who didn't really have faith about what I believe and why I believe it and why I'm so different from when we were in college, and they can see a change. They're like, you're night and day. And so some of them have started to come to Mass and are getting married in the church when they wouldn't otherwise have gotten married in the church, and are baptizing their babies, which is so beautiful. But for me, it's just very simple. I think, Jesus has done so much in my life that why wouldn't I share the goodness of who he is and what he's done? And yeah, it's just, I think that's why I talk about him on Instagram. My friends sometimes message me and they're like, what was that you were talking about? What in the Catechism said the what? And I'm like, it's just, I think you have to be yourself. And I think so many people my age don't feel comfortable being themselves, and by the grace of God I'm now very comfortable with who I am, and so I share that. But yeah, I guess that's just something that I would encourage for any of the young people here. If you're afraid of sharing your faith with people, or if you think they'll judge you, they might, but like what you'll gain in return is far greater. You'll gain an interior freedom, where you have the space to be vulnerable and come up here and tell people your deepest, darkest and all of that, and it's not going to faze you, because you know that what God has done in your life is so beautiful and is worth telling people about. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. But okay, thank you so much.
Thanks a million to Clodagh for sharing with us there. The age of the Church in Need, they're probably one of only two proper Catholic charities now between the various meals, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're absolutely excellent charity. We'll have our last speaker, because I know that the time is moving on. They might have a small little break for 5 minutes, and then we might open it up for questions then, if that's all right. So it is my pleasure to introduce our last speaker, who has become a prominent voice in Irish media and public discourse as a journalist, commentator and content creator. He is well known for his incisive analysis and commitment to free speech, national identity and democratic values. Through his work with griptmedia and his broader contributions to public debate, he has challenged mainstream narratives and provided a platform for alternative perspectives on key social and political issues. His passion for truth, his courage in tackling difficult topics, and his ability to engage audiences with clarity and conviction make him a compelling and most welcome voice in today's one-sided media landscape. His interviews of Irish politicians are a fine blend of prime TV and comedy gold sometimes. So we are delighted to have him with us tonight. So please welcome Mr. benscallan.
I think my interactions with politicians are comedy gold, but probably not for them. I think they have a different opinion on the matter. Thank you so much, Father, for inviting me to speak at this excellent event. Thank you so much to my fellow panelists. Some fantastic contributions there, which I'd certainly like to chase up with you, in particular, Ciarán, afterwards, about discipline and the focus unit. I've already fallen off my New Year's resolution as far as the gym goes, so I might need some tips in that regard. In particular, I wish he was still here, because Ronan made some fantastic points about St. Thomas More, and you'd swear I paid him to say that, because it dovetails perfectly with how I plan to start off my contributions here. I love St. Thomas More. I was baptised in 2019 as an adult, and I took the confirmation name Thomas after that man because of his spectacular contribution to public life. And I'm sure most of us are familiar with his story. The movie A Man for All Seasons is obviously well known, but for those who might not be too familiar, he was an English Catholic statesman from the 1500s. He was a champion of conscience. He, much as Ciarán said, he believed very much in discipline. He used to wear a hair shirt for most of his life. He engaged in self-flagellation as a form of penance. So a humble man, somebody who understood what it took to deny yourself. And I'd just like to read a couple of quotes of what people said about him who knew him during his life. One person said, "Did nature ever invent anything kinder, sweeter, or more harmonious than the character of Thomas More?" The same person said that More was born and designed for friendship. "No one is more open-hearted in making friends or more tenacious in keeping them." And after More's death, people said that he never bore ill intent towards anyone. And yet, as many of us know in this room, More ended his life by having his head cut off by the state. And you think, how could somebody who was so friendly and agreeable and loving end up on the wrong side of the state to such an extent that he would be beheaded? And the answer is, he refused to go along with King Henry VIII's decision to split from the Catholic Church, to get a divorce. More, being a devout Catholic, said, "I'm not going to go along with this." And so he fell afoul of the authorities, and one thing led to another, and it resulted in his eventual demise. But the key point here, in my view, and the reason I love More so much, is before he was executed, he turned to the crowd and he said, "I die the king's good servant, but God's first." And this is such a critical point, because even to the end, he didn't view it as an antagonistic relationship, that he had made himself the enemy of the king and that he wanted the king's destruction. He wasn't calling down curses on the people who were doing this to him. So far as he saw it, he was doing the king a service by trying to steer him away from a terrible decision that would damn his soul and that would destroy the country at large. And so he viewed it as a service that he was doing to the state, even as that same state attacked him. And so, as somebody who is a political journalist, I take great inspiration from this. I have to be absolutely clear at this point in saying I do not embody the values I just outlined. I have plenty of uncharitable thoughts. I am a flawed person. I'm very, very far from a saint and very, very far from Thomas More. But I think it's a roadmap that he laid out there as to how we as citizens or journalists or politicians should view the reigning secular authorities in the states in which we live. Because think about the terrible advice that our political leaders receive in this country and the outcome of that, not just for the country, but for them. You know, over the last several decades, we've become a poorer society in many ways. Of course, on paper, it looks like the exchequer is booming, and we're told there's money to be thrown around like confetti, and yet fundamental things like housing and energy costs have become increasingly unaffordable for the vast majority of people in this country and many of the poorest among us. So whatever wealth is theoretically in the country, it doesn't seem to be actually reaching the pockets of most of the citizenry. So economically, we don't seem to be doing as well as you would think we would if our leaders were receiving good guidance. You think about how we've progressed morally, if you can call that progressing. We're a country that now has tens of thousands of abortions over the last couple of years since the 8th Amendment was repealed. And this was the same government that told us if we repealed the 8th, abortion would become rare. I don't think anybody, when they were casting their vote in favour of rare abortions, envisaged tens of thousands of dead babies within a few short years. The rate of sexually transmitted diseases is through the roof. You have all sorts of moral degradation when it comes to children being confused about their fundamental identity in the school system, all sponsored by the state. So clearly we're not becoming a better or more virtuous people. And even politically, a lot of the time you think, oh well, politicians are just doing what they're doing to get votes. They're amoral mercenaries who just want to benefit themselves politically, and perhaps there's an element of truth to that in some cases. But Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil have seen their combined vote shares dramatically decrease over the last several decades. These used to be superpowers, and of course they came out of the election just gone with a majority. They were able to form a government, but their vote share continues to go down with every election. So clearly even they are not benefiting from the policies they're pursuing. It's not going to spell good news for them in the long term. So all of this has to raise the question, what are these people being told by their advisors? They have legions of paid special advisors. Many of these people are receiving hundreds of thousands of euros a year to give expert analysis of how the politicians should proceed, and yet what do they have to show for it? A worse society by almost every measurable metric, including for the politician's own career. So, with that said, I feel like my job is to try and be one of the only people in these politicians' lives who will tell them the truth. And I think that's a benefit to them as much as it is to the country, because I was struck last year by then Justice Minister Helen McEntee during an interview. She said that she hears often in the media members of her party anonymously running to the press saying, oh, I'm really unhappy with Minister McEntee's law, let's say the hate speech bill or some other contentious piece of legislation. I don't think Helen's doing a good job, or I don't like what she's doing in this area. But she said during this interview, none of them ever say this to me. I've never once had one of my colleagues come into my office and say, Helen, I don't like the way you're doing things. I just hear about it through the media like everybody else. I hear this anonymous TD allegedly said X, Y, and Z about me. And I thought, how lonely and isolating must that be for the minister? How sad is that you're there and you know your colleagues have all these reservations about what you're doing, but nobody has the integrity or the courage or the compassion to come to you and say, hey, maybe this is a bad idea. And then that all culminates in things like the family and care referendums, where many of our politicians were humiliated because, believe it or not, trying to remove the word woman from the Constitution on International Women's Day and Mother's Day weekend, no less, actually isn't very popular. I find that shocking. I don't know about you, but apparently they needed to be told that in a resounding referendum and have their face smacked with a freshly baked pie to receive that message. So, with all of that said, that's why I think my purpose and the purpose of people like me and the purpose of people like us in this room as ordinary citizens should be to try and help our politicians, whether they know that we're helping them or not, and whether they want our help or not. Because as we know, love is not always doing what people want you to do. Sometimes you have to engage in a bit of tough love and tell people the hard truths, as Jesus Christ did during his life, that might not be the most palatable thing in the world. And so I think this is part of why I find this job so fulfilling, and God in his infinite wisdom, I believe, has a path laid out for me, because when I was, as I say, I'm an adult convert, and several years ago I was discerning whether or not I should go down the route of getting involved in a controversial political media career, because the issues that we're talking about are not exactly the most popular views in the country. We know that most people are not on board with the pro-life worldview, for example, or the Catholic worldview, or many other issues that we discuss. And so I was in Adam and Eve's church in Dublin, and it was 9 o'clock mass, so it was late at night, and I was there and I was praying to God, thinking, what should I do? Is this the right path for me? Should I pursue this? And God doesn't often speak to us, or at least not to me. You hear people saying, I think God is telling me to do this, and I never really understood what that meant, because often he can be a little bit unclear, or maybe we just don't listen. But I'm there praying, and at that moment I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I looked back and there was an older lady there who said, I just wanted to say, I really like that you're a young person, and I can see you're really engrossed in your prayer, and that you really take the faith seriously, and that's such a refreshing thing to see today. So I just wanted to give you this. And she handed me a little card, and it just so happened, I didn't even know this going in, but it happened to be the feast day of St. Oliver Plunkett. And it was a prayer card. and I read the prayer card, and it was a prayer asking God to give the person saying the prayer the courage to be like St. Oliver Plunkett and to give your life for Ireland, and to engage in a self-sacrificial love of this country for the good of the faith and for the good of the soul of this country effectively. And I thought that's about as close to a letter from the man upstairs as you're going to get, and it would be pretty outrageous to ignore something like this. And so that pretty much sealed the deal for me, and I've never looked back. And I think that's been a pivotal moment for me, and all I can do is try my very best to be the good counsellor of our politicians that they probably hate, but that I think they need. And so with that, I would only conclude by saying how important it is to pray for our politicians, pray for the good ones, the bad ones, the ones that we like Senator Mullen, and the ones who absolutely drive us up the wall, pray for them especially, and love them the way God loves them, even when they make that very, very difficult. So thank you so much for your time.
The faith in a faithless world, maybe their experience, as I say, their experience, strength or hope or whatever you have to ask, but please make the question short. Maybe please, if you can stick to one line, and if it's one of these, my opinion is we'd rather not hear it tonight. Save it for again. Thanks very much. So whoever has a question, I'll do my best Pat Kenny impression here. Say, gentleman in the blue tie. Mary.
Thank you. I think that it's fair to say that there's been a radical agenda to undermine the faith in politics. What I'm interested in is from the three people in the panel, because there's quite a variety of experiences of your own faith, and who informed your faith, how did you learn about your faith, did you receive any instruction, was it an example? I think that's really concrete, something important.
Okay, perfect. And again, just for our panelists as well, if you can, I know it might take you could answer that over a few hours, but just to briefly answer as well so we can move on. So appreciate it.
For me, it was just growing up in a Catholic family, having access to the sacraments, and as I said, like when I was speaking, that it was only later I really found out what it all meant. But being sacramentalized, I think, is huge, because then when you do come back to the faith, it's very simple. You just go to confession. Whereas if you're not sacramentalized, it's a different story. But yeah, just being raised in a Catholic family.
Yeah, exact same as Clodagh there. Raised by my mother and grandmother. I was raised Catholic, and just exactly the same. When you get that bit older, realising what the sacraments are there and why they're there, that was it for me. And again, like I said, I don't want to go on for hours with my own experiences, but I'll hand it over to Ben.
I'm a convert to the faith, and one of that will be a whole multi-hour thing in and of itself if I was to go over that, so I won't go over that issue in any detail, but just to answer your question, I think I realised that the so-called golden rule that all people believe pretty much the same thing, which is that we should be nice to each other and you should be kind to those around you, that's not really true, or at least it wasn't true until Jesus Christ brought his message of universal brotherly love and fraternity. Because you think about something like the caste system in Hinduism, and the idea that karma, a lot of people like the idea of karma. They say, it makes sense to say that if you do something good things happen to you, and if you do bad things happen to you. But if you think about the logical extension of that means that if somebody is doing poorly, let's say somebody is homeless, they must have done something bad to deserve that, and therefore I don't have to help them. And so, when you think about a society that embraces that worldview, poor people get treated very poorly, and so that's just one example of the ways in which this belief that we all have an inherent value and an inherent worth in the eyes of God is very unique to the Christian belief system, And so I think that realization of how profound what Jesus was saying was, it's very easy to discount Jesus if you think, oh yeah, he was just kind of rehashing what everybody else already believes. That's not true. Jesus is a revolutionary figure, and I wanted to get involved with that revolution.
Thanks. And it's interesting what Claude and Ciarán said about the sacraments as well, because I think it's a bigger debate now whether to take them out of schools or not. And I won't ask you now, but it'd be interesting to hear what you would think of that as well. So, great, you can hang on to the mic for another. Anyone else? Lady with the hand up there. You do a better impression, would you not?
Your opinion or your advice on whose decision it is about taking statues and the tabernacle out of hospitals around the country. Is it the HSE that are making that decision? Is it government that's making that decision? Is it the hospitals themselves? Is there anything that us as lay people can do to lobby it or advocate for it? Change.
Is that for?
I was hoping. Sergeant Mullen, is he gone?
No, he's gone, yeah.
Yeah, okay. But if you have any advice or anything that you've come across even in your line of work as to answers that you might have maybe?
I think there's a very small subsection of malcontents who are upset with the fact that there might be a crucifix on the wall of a historically Catholic church, and even people who are very liberal atheists don't have a problem with this by and large. And one great example of this is our new health minister, Jennifer Carroll McNeil, who is very liberal, very progressive. She's a self-professed atheist. She said that she has no problem with religious iconography in churches, and that she actually found solace when she was going through a medical issue, or somebody in her family was, I believe, I forget the exact situation, but she was going through a hard time in a hospital, and that she found the fact that there was, a chapel there to be fulfilling in that moment of crisis, as many people do. So if even people like that can see the utility in it, you realize it's a very small, screeching fringe minority, and I don't think most reasonable, sensible people are going to jump out the window because a hospital that was founded probably by Catholic nuns or monks is Catholic in its presentation. But thank you for the question.
I pretty much just agree with what Ben said. Of my friends who are not practicing kind of secular, anytime the faith comes up, they really don't have a problem with the faith, they just don't want to be forced to practice it themselves, or they really, I guess, don't see yet that they do need it. I agree. I think it is a minority of, as you said, malcontents who just who have that vocal issue with it.
No, unfortunately, no advice, that'd be more for Ben, or who to bring that to, but I give you my opinion. It's just, like I mentioned in the talk, it's just sad to see the country has forgotten its history and why we are here today because of that, and it's because of our faith. So it's tragic.
Just to exactly what you just said, it's sad that, as you said, if it's a small minority, that so much action has been taken on such a small minority. Thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Hi, I wanted to thank you all for your talks. They were very good. And I just saw kind of a theme throughout all of them, whether it was about returning to the faith or just the need for us to step up in politics, that there's just a crisis of identity in Ireland, particularly with the young people, regarding patriotism and Catholicism. And so I was just wondering if you could kind of expand on how we can cultivate both of those things simultaneously, whether it's just in something very small and practical, in like whether you've interest in Irish literature that blends Catholicism and patriotism, or a good film. It's just kind of returning to what gives us our roots in those two elements. Thank you.
I think that's hard. I think we're a nation at war with our history, and people don't really want to admit all of the good that Catholicism has done. They kind of see the faith as something, and I'm speaking really for my friends here, which is what they've told me, is that they see the faith as something for a generation that's gone, and not something that really has any value for them and in their lives, because they get support from one another, or they get comfort from their lifestyles. But something that I always like to remind them is that they themselves have virtues, and they get annoyed sometimes when I say this, but I say, you have kindness and you have the virtue of patience, and all of that is something that was handed down to you by your parents who were Catholic, and by their parents who were Catholic, and actually the person that you are is a culmination of so many Catholics who lived out their faith. And you don't really like that when I say that, but it is true. And so I think just maybe if we can, in one-to-one conversation with people, remind people of where they come from. But yeah, that's a really hard question, because, as I said, I think we are a nation at war with our actual identity. And so, yeah, I don't know really how else to answer that.
I think we all have a duty as ourselves, like I said, to be the example. I was a bit reluctant to say this, but I suppose, not to mention it, but the history that has happened in Ireland with the church. Now, I'm going to correlate that with myself, and what I mean by that is, the sport, the nature of sport I do, it's of course violent. And hopefully you don't, after this, maybe look at my sport as maybe some of the actions of the individuals that have participated in my sport. And that's not what it is, that's the individuals. And that goes the same for the church. And that still has its effect on Ireland, unfortunately, but hopefully we, us here, all of you out there, can be good examples for that. And I think there's a great duty as well in schools even as well now. The more that these further education schools are coming in, and of course, maybe people are talking about taking church crosses down and the statues and stuff. But I know, speaking for myself, my own nephew at home, they still do morning prayers, and morning lunchtime prayers even, and which it is still there. But I think like I said, we can only focus on what we can do, and maybe Ben can say here now that what people in authority can do.
I thought on the issue of patriotism, Ciarán made a fantastic point during his speech, which was about the fact that so many of the rebel heroes, which this country rightly lionizes, were devoutly Catholic individuals who took their faith deadly seriously, even including, we have like a socialist tradition in this country, people like Jim Larkin and so on. Jim Larkin was a passionate Catholic. He was also a Marxist, but he would fight people viciously if they were to argue that he was in somehow not a practicing Catholic. So even the most left-wing among them would have been adherents of the faith. And you think about how interwoven the faith is with the Irish nationalist movement in something as simple as, we often refer to the 1916 Rising, but its other name is the Easter Rising. And it wasn't an accident that they just so happened to pick Easter week as the week that they would launch their rebellion. That was done to symbolize the resurrection of the Irish nation as Jesus Christ rose from the dead. They had the proclamation, and as we've all seen, if you read the proclamation, the opening words of it are, "In the name of God and of the dead generations." And then towards the end of the document, it refers to how they want to invoke God's blessing on their movement so that they don't stoop to inhumanity, that while we're fighting this war, of course, we're going to have to engage in combat, but we don't want to do anything that is unbefitting of a Christian, effectively, that they were asking God to bless them, to prevent them from stooping to that level. And that bookended the proclamation. And that goes back to through all the different rebellions that we have. All of these leaders, many of them were fighting for the Christian faith, and not all of them were Catholic. We know many of them were Protestants, Wolfe Tone, Robert Emmet and these guys, but Christianity at the very least is so inextricably linked with Irishness that if you remove Christianity, you basically have nothing left. It's like sawing a branch that you're sitting on and expecting not to plunge to a disaster. So that I think is the fatal mistake that modern secular people make when they try to jettison Christianity and then they realise there's no substance left to Irish culture. Like, what are we, just a nation of drunks who have, like football? Like, what is there to get passionate about if there's no eternal meaning to it?
Hi guys, look, thank you so much, and I loved what that lady said just before. I was just wondering if there's anything that we could get that would have the statistics on, the real facts about what Catholicism has done for this country, and the statistics on the actual, abuse and all that. I just find, like, if we don't really know what to say to people when they ask us about the Catholic Church, and I just think it'd be great if we could have something. I don't know if you guys have any suggestions on how we could learn more about our Catholic faith, and even just have to one website almost with these. We need to know more apologetics, maybe, as Catholics, and really know our faith. Any suggestions on that?
Well, I'd just start there to say, as young people, I probably didn't touch on that as much. The technology we have now, and the effect of social media. Of course, Clodagh mentioned that as well, and I think it's knowing what you believe in. I actually did a talk before, and one of the days was Ciarán Clarke. He's the county manager of the Louth football team, and he started off, I thought it was brilliant, what he actually believes in. And I think that was a big thing for me, like, why? What do I believe in here? Because I know it's true, so I want to find out everything about it. And I think a good place to start for even young people, just to keep to the team, would be, there's an app free. Maybe it's €2-3 a month, or I'm not 100% sure on that, but it's called Hallow. And I think we've all heard of that, but that has transformed me. There's everything on it, all the information. I've literally went through the Bible, and I drive to and from train, listening to the Bible. From there, there's daily rosaries. Literally, the stories of the saints, everything. So I think from there, when you know your knowledge, you're equipped for these questions. And I think Joe Rogan said it now, again, he's to mention Joe, but he said, if you were to ring me up in the morning and say about this, about martial arts or comedy, he said, I could just, in a blink of an eye, at 4 in the morning, tell you about it. And I think that's what we need to be at. I'm not at that, certainly not. I'm trying, because, that's what I want to be at, that I can, I'm equipped for these type of things. And I suppose that's what we can do as ourselves,
I definitely agree with that. That we have to know our faith, and that can be such a challenge because there's so much to know. Like, I feel like I'm learning every single day. I'll open another book and be like, oh, I didn't know that was part of our faith, and that's something really beautiful. And I think sometimes when my friends ask me, but how can you be Catholic because of XYZ? Sometimes there's great humility in just saying, I don't know. Or this is something personal to me, and when it comes back to kind of like just respecting that you believe what you believe because it's your faith, sometimes they then take a step back, and you nearly almost have to remind them, like, I'm not responsible for all of the atrocities in the church. I'm just one person. I mentioned in my talk that my experience of the church was very positive growing up, and so it wasn't until I kind of really came back to my faith as an adult that I encountered people blaming me for stuff that happened before I was born, and I still get that now sometimes, and my response is always just to try and have compassion, because I think that it would be such a tragedy if I were to respond to that with any level of aggression or any level of or any a refusal to listen or a refusal to understand. Sometimes all people want is for you to listen, and often when I'm out promoting Aid to the Church in Need, I'll get people who'll come up and say, why are you promoting a project of the churches or a charity of the churches? Does the church not have enough money? Have they not done enough damage to the world? Why should we give them any money? They're probably keeping it and whatever. And my response is always just to listen, and in those conversations when that person finds that I'm not giving them statistics or pushing back or arguing while I'm just listening, what I'm doing then is facilitating space for conversation, and I'm getting to the why of why they feel the way they feel, and usually it's because they've been hurt And so the answer then is not for me to give them an answer, it's just to be there for them and be an active witness in that moment of Christian compassion and mercy. And hopefully they walk away from that and they think, oh, I met a practicing Catholic and they weren't the worst person in the world. And sometimes that's all we can do, and we just entrust it to the Holy Spirit and He will do the rest, because it's not our job to convert people and save souls. That's His job. All we have to do is a little bit that we have to do, and that's all.
I think those are all excellent points, and in addition, I would say, without minimising terrible things that have been done at the hands of members of the church hierarchy, of course, which were horrific, I also think politicians have done a lot of bad things over the years. That doesn't make me any less proud to be Irish. I believe that the Irish nation is bigger than individual poor leaders who we've had over the years. My entire perception of my Irish identity does not hinge upon this particular Taoiseach or this particular president or this particular minister. And in the same way, an institution as ancient as the Catholic Church, which has been around for 2,000 years, is so much bigger than a bad leader or a group of bad leaders that may exist in one period of time, in one geographical location. So that doesn't mean what happened isn't very serious and awful, obviously, but it is just to say that I don't think it's reasonable to try and zero in on a very, very small section of the church's history, given the thousands of years of wonderful charitable contributions that institution has given to the world. And I would also say, anybody who's surprised and shocked by the fact that Catholics and even Catholic leaders do bad things is not familiar with the Christian faith, because the very first book of the Bible starts with a story about humanity doing the wrong thing and blatantly disobeying God and bringing destruction and disaster on itself. And even the New Testament begins with all of the apostles abandoning Jesus, with the exception of one. The first pope engaged in cowardice. He proved himself a liar. He said, I'll never abandon you, and then he did just that. One of his apostles betrayed him. So my point is, it started with disaster. It's been a disaster since day one. The idea that there was this perfect, unblemished record that was then suddenly ruined by a handful of bad clergymen in the last century is just not accurate. So we should expect these kinds of things in any kind of institution that's comprised of human beings, but that doesn't mean that the entire church is worthless or that it doesn't have something beautiful to contribute to the world. That would be my response to that particular issue. Thank you so much for the question.
It's 9:30 now, so I'll take one final question if you have a burning desire for the best question of the night, if you have it.
I just want to ask, what is your favourite prayer for each of the panellists and why?
That's a nice one to finish up.
I've recently, I don't know if it counts as one prayer, but I've recently, well, in the last year, every day I pray the hours, like the office of the church. So I'll do my morning prayer, evening prayer, and night prayer. Maybe that's cheating because that's 3 prayers, but it really sets me up for my day, and it's like a little rhythm, a little pattern throughout the day, and I'm connected to the rest of the church in that. And I find it's a really good way to get scripture in. Because then God is speaking directly to me, and I love it. I find so much joy and so much beauty in it. So the office of the church.
I would say it's the rosary for me. Have rosaries in the van, and I can say it on the way down or driving or anywhere. And it'd be a big thing I'd rely on a lot, to be honest. And I think actually, I'm not sure who mentioned it here. I could have been full Sheen again, but I think all of the senses are working when you're doing it. Your speech, physical, and as well, your eyes as well. And so I think it's a very powerful tool. And again, that's why Our Lady was giving us, look where we are. I think I nearly kind of forget where I am here now. That's, even talk about the history of the church and of Ireland. She chose to come here. She's given this as a powerful weapon. So for me, that was a big thing for me. And I've often brought into the catering and stuff. And yeah, it's a powerful weapon, you know.
I personally love the litany of humility, which I think some people will be familiar with, and it's the kind of thing that, because of, I'm not going to say in general because of people's pride, because I don't know, we talk to a room full of saints, but for my pride particularly, it strikes at the core. It lets you identify the areas in which you have pride that you don't even realize necessarily, because you're praying for things like, as people will know who know the prayer, God, that I can decrease in the eyes of the world and that other people will increase. Give me the grace to desire it, or asking God to give you the grace that you don't fear being falsely accused of something, that you are happy to accept whatever false accusations or smears the world wants to throw at you. Obviously, you can imagine how somebody who is in a combative political arena would think about such things a lot. I find that the litany of humility really, I would still struggle with issues like that, as I think we all do, but it helps you to realize how you should be thinking if you are aiming to achieve sainthood in this life, which is, of course, all of our vocation.
That is it, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.